In a small apartment in the suburbs of Fresno, California, Rebecca Henderson was checking her daily schedule while drinking her morning coffee. She worked as a full-time bookkeeper at a local accounting firm. She led a regular life, waking up at 7 every morning and arriving at the office by 8:30. Her husband Michael was a construction site supervisor at a local construction company. They had been married for 5 years, and he was still a kind husband who helped clean up after breakfast and went grocery shopping with her on weekends. They didn't have children yet, but the two of them lived peaceful and fulfilling days. What mattered most to Rebecca was her mother, Dorothy. After losing her father 10 years ago, her mother lived alone, but she was still healthy, and having lunch with Rebecca at a nearby cafe every weekend had become their shared pleasure. Dorothy was a former elementary school teacher and a good conversationalist, but lately she sometimes repeated the same stories. The doctor had said it was the early stages of mild dementia, but it didn't interfere with her daily life, and Rebecca wasn't particularly worried. Her younger sister Jennifer worked at a major insurance company in Sacramento. She had just been promoted to manager recently and was leading busy days. The sisters had a good relationship, but Jennifer only visited about once a month, leaving their mother's care almost entirely to Rebecca. Still, Rebecca didn't blame her sister. She understood that work was busy, and their mother always said, "Jennifer is working hard, so don't worry about it." Change came to this peaceful daily routine on a chilly afternoon in October. While Rebecca was working on monthly closing at her workplace, her cell phone rang. It was a call from the hospital. She was told that her mother had fallen down the stairs at home and had been taken by ambulance. Rebecca hurried to leave work early and rushed to the hospital with Michael. At the emergency room of Central Valley General Hospital, Rebecca found her mother. Dorothy was grimacing in pain on a stretcher, but when she saw her daughter, she showed a relieved expression. "Rebecca, I'm sorry for worrying you," Dorothy said in a weak voice. "I slipped on the stairs when I was going down." According to the doctor's explanation, Dorothy had fractured her left femur and needed surgery. It was explained that femur fractures in elderly people were serious and could result in difficulty walking if not treated properly. Rebecca became anxious, but the doctor was experienced and told her that the success rate of the surgery was high. The surgery was performed the next morning and was successfully completed after 3 hours. When Dorothy woke up from anesthesia, she was still groggy, but when she saw Rebecca's face, she smiled. "I'll be fine, I'll get better soon," her mother said while holding her daughter's hand. "The doctor fixed me up so well." The doctor told them that about a month of hospitalization would be necessary for rehabilitation. Dorothy would spend the first few days in the intensive care unit and then move to a general ward. Rebecca was worried about her mother and decided to visit the hospital every day after work. Fortunately, Dorothy's recovery was smooth. A week after surgery, she was able to sit in a wheelchair and began rehabilitation under the guidance of a physical therapist. The nurses were also kind, and Dorothy was satisfied, saying, "Everyone treats me so well." Rebecca was also relieved and decided to continue her daily visits, believing in her mother's recovery. About 2 weeks after the surgery, Dorothy was moved from a private room to a 4-person room. This was done considering medical costs, but Rebecca was pleased that her mother could interact with other patients. Dorothy also accepted it positively, saying, "It's more fun to have someone to talk to than being alone." Rebecca's daily routine was set. She woke up at 7 in the morning, had a simple breakfast with Michael, then went to the office at 8:30. During lunch break, she bought fruit and sweets for her mother, and after finishing work at 5 in the afternoon, she went straight to the hospital. Central Valley General Hospital was about a 15-minute drive from Rebecca's workplace. After parking her car in the hospital parking lot and entering the hospital, she would take the elevator to the orthopedic ward on the 3rd floor as usual. The hallway smelled of disinfectant, and nurses were busily coming and going. Rebecca always felt grateful watching their dedicated work. "Mom, how are you feeling today?" Rebecca would kiss her mother's cheek as usual when entering the room. So, Dorothy would smile at her daughter. "But the food at this hospital is really terrible. Today's lunch was some soup where I couldn't tell what was in it." Rebecca laughed and took out the fruit she had brought. "I'll peel an apple for you. The doctor said you should eat more fruit, didn't he?" "Thank you, you're such a sweet daughter," Dorothy said, sitting up in bed. "Isn't Michael coming today?" "He said he had overtime today, but he might come later if he has time," Rebecca answered while cutting the apple into small pieces. The roommates were all elderly women, and they were all kind. Mrs. Wilson in the next bed was hospitalized for knee surgery. She was always cheerful and helped lighten the mood in the room. "Rebecca dear, you came again today," Mrs. Wilson called out. "Dorothy is a lucky woman. Having her daughter visit every day." "It's only natural," Rebecca replied. "We're family." The conversations with Dorothy were trivial. Weather talk, hospital happenings, old memories. Even when her mother repeated the same stories, Rebecca would nod as if hearing them for the first time. She understood it was a symptom of mild dementia, but she didn't want to hurt her mother. "Oh yes, the rehabilitation therapist praised me, saying my recovery is fast," Dorothy spoke happily. "She said I might be able to start practicing walking with a walker next week." "That's wonderful news," Rebecca was genuinely pleased. "You're working so hard, Mom." A nurse came into the room with medicine. She was a young woman who always smiled when dealing with patients. "Mrs. Hamilton, here's your medicine after dinner," the nurse handed the medicine to Dorothy. "How was today's rehabilitation?" "It was very good," Dorothy replied. "Everyone is so kind to me." The nurse distributed medicine to other patients as well and left the room looking busy. Rebecca admired their high professional consciousness. She thought it must be physically and mentally demanding work with night shifts, but everyone treated patients kindly. In the third week, her sister Jennifer came to visit after a long time. She appeared to be coming from work, wearing a suit and looking a little tired. "Mom, have you been well?" Jennifer kissed her mother. "Work has been so busy, I'm sorry I couldn't come." "Don't worry about it," Dorothy held her daughter's hand. "I know work is hard for you. Rebecca comes every day." Jennifer looked at Rebecca gratefully. "Sis, thank you always. Ever since I became manager, every day passes like a storm." "It's okay," Rebecca smiled. "Visiting Mom is also my pleasure." The three of them spent about an hour together pleasantly. Jennifer told her mother about work, and Dorothy listened proudly to her daughter's promotion. There was no hostile atmosphere between the sisters at all, and Rebecca completely understood her sister's circumstances. "I'll come again next weekend," Jennifer said when leaving. "I hope you'll be even more recovered by then." "Yes, I'll work hard," Dorothy replied. "You work hard at your job too." After Jennifer left, Dorothy said to Rebecca, "That child has it hard too. But I feel at ease because you're here." "It's only natural, Mom," Rebecca held her mother's hand. "We're family." That night, Rebecca talked about her mother's recovery while having dinner with Michael. "It seems like she's recovering smoothly, which is good," Michael said. "Aunt Dorothy is a strong person." "Yes. But I still worry endlessly because of her age," Rebecca replied. "When she's discharged, I plan to check on her more frequently." "That's good. I'll help when I have time too." And today too, they plan to visit together. As always, Rebecca brought fruit and Dorothy's favorite cookies. The route to the hospital was familiar, and the two exchanged light conversation while driving. "I hope Mom is in a good mood today," Rebecca said. "She seemed a little tired yesterday." I'm sure she'll be fine, Michael replied. Aunt Dorothy always perks up when she sees us. Rebecca was grateful again for her husband's kindness. Michael cherished his mother-in-law as if she were his own mother. She hoped this peaceful and tranquil daily life would continue forever. They parked in the hospital parking lot and walked hand in hand toward the hospital. They took the elevator to the 3rd floor and headed to the orthopedic ward as usual. In the hallway, nurses were working busily, and people who seemed to be patients' families were coming and going. Everything was the same scenery as always. They knocked on the room door and entered to find Dorothy napping in bed. The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, enveloping the room in gentle light. Rebecca and Michael sat in chairs beside the bed, being careful not to make noise. "Let's be quiet," Rebecca whispered to Michael. "She seems tired." The other patients in the room also seemed to be taking their afternoon rest. Mrs. Wilson was reading a magazine and waved slightly to greet Rebecca and Michael. The room was wrapped in silence, with only occasional footsteps from the hallway and the distant sound of nurse calls echoing. About 10 minutes later, Dorothy slowly woke up. At first she was groggy, but when she recognized her daughter and son-in-law, she smiled faintly. However, Rebecca sensed something different in her mother's expression. There was a smile, but she could see fatigue and anxiety in the depths of her eyes. "Oh, you came," Dorothy called out, but her voice sounded smaller and weaker than usual. "Mom, you seem tired," Rebecca approached her mother worriedly. "Did you sleep well last night?" "Yes, I'm fine," Dorothy replied, but the answer seemed to lack conviction. "I'm just a little tired." Michael also stood up from his chair and spoke to his mother-in-law. "How are you feeling, Aunt? Is rehabilitation going well?" "Yes, it's going well," Dorothy replied, but then Rebecca noticed what looked like a faint bruise on her mother's wrist. At first she thought it might be from an, but looking closely, it appeared to be marks in the shape of fingers. "Mom, what happened to your wrist?" Rebecca asked with concern. "Oh, this?" Dorothy hastily hid her wrist under the blanket. "It's from when I fell. It's nothing serious." However, Rebecca found her mother's reaction unnatural. Dorothy was usually someone who honestly told her daughter about even the smallest things. Yet today, there was an atmosphere as if she was hiding something. "Are you really okay? If anything troubling has happened, don't hesitate to tell me," Rebecca said, looking into her mother's eyes. "Don't worry," Dorothy lightly squeezed her daughter's hand. "I'm really okay." However, Michael had sharp observational skills. From his years of experience working on construction sites, he was sensitive to changes in people's expressions and attitudes. He sensed something abnormal in Dorothy's behavior. Her hand movements, the way her eyes wandered, her tone of voice, everything was different from usual. "Rebecca," Michael suddenly stood up. "I forgot something in the car." Rebecca looked up at her husband. Michael's complexion had clearly worsened. It was completely different from his usual calm expression. His face was pale and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. He had a tense expression as if he had noticed something. "Forgot something? What did you forget?" Rebecca was confused. "Something important." Michael gripped his wife's hand tightly. That hand seemed to be trembling. "Could you come with me?" Rebecca was surprised by her husband's abnormal behavior. This was the first time she had seen Michael so agitated. In their 5 years of marriage, she had never seen him this flustered. She instinctively knew there must be a serious problem. "All right," Rebecca stood up. "Mom, we're just going to the car for a moment. We'll be right back." "Yes, go ahead," Dorothy replied, but there was a tone of relief in her voice. As if she wanted them to leave. Michael pulled Rebecca's hand as they left the room. While walking down the hallway, Rebecca tried to question her husband, but Michael only said, "Let's talk in the car." His pace was fast, clearly being rushed by something. Even in the elevator, Michael remained silent. Rebecca looked at her husband's profile, but his expression was hard, as if he was deeply contemplating something serious. When the elevator reached the first floor, Michael quickly headed outside the hospital. When they reached the parking lot, Michael opened the car door and urged his wife, "Get in quickly." When Rebecca sat in the passenger seat, Michael immediately locked all the doors. The action was mechanical, as if trying to protect themselves from something. Without starting the engine, Michael took a deep breath. "Michael, what on earth happened?" Rebecca looked at her husband anxiously. "You're acting strange." Michael turned around and looked directly into his wife's eyes. Those eyes held a mixture of fear and anger. "Didn't you really notice?" His voice was low and trembling. "What are you talking about?" Rebecca was confused. "I don't understand anything." "Didn't you see Aunt Dorothy's arms? Not just her wrist. Around her elbow, on her shoulders too." Michael took out his smartphone with trembling hands. "While you were in the bathroom, I took photos." "Photos? Photos of what?" Rebecca's heart began to beat violently. "Look at this." Michael turned his smartphone screen toward his wife. On the screen was a photo of Dorothy's arm. Rebecca gasped. Her mother's arm had countless blue bruises from wrist to elbow. They were clearly marks from being grabbed hard by someone's hands. Some bruises were so clear that the shape of fingers could be distinctly seen. "This is..." Rebecca was speechless. "That's not all." Michael swiped the screen. "There are also scratch marks around her shoulders. This isn't from a fall." Rebecca covered her mouth with her hand. Her mother's body had clear traces of violence. Moreover, the mixture of old and new wounds indicated that this had been happening continuously, not just once or twice. But who? Why? Rebecca was confused. "That's the problem," Michael said in a heavy tone. "Aunt Dorothy is trying to hide it from us." "Why do you think that is?" Rebecca's mind went blank. She couldn't accept the reality that something terrible was happening to her beloved mother at the hospital she trusted. "What should we do?" Rebecca asked in a trembling voice. Michael gripped his wife's hand and answered with a determined expression. "First, we contact the police. Then we go back to the hospital and find out the truth." Rebecca was crying in the passenger seat. She couldn't understand why her mother had tried to hide those bruises. Why hadn't she asked her daughter for help? Why had she suffered alone? "Mom was scared," Rebecca murmured. "She didn't want to worry us, so she endured it alone." "That must be it." Michael placed his hand on his wife's shoulder. "But it's okay now. Let's uncover the truth." 15 minutes later, police vehicles arrived at the hospital parking lot. Veteran female Detective Johnson and young male Detective Martinez got out of the car. Michael and Rebecca approached them and explained the situation in detail. "Could you show us the photos?" Detective Johnson said quietly. When Michael showed his smartphone, both detectives became serious. "These are clearly signs of abuse," Detective Martinez said. "Let's go to the hospital immediately." The four of them entered the hospital together. Rebecca was extremely worried about her mother. What was her mother thinking now, alone in the room? Perhaps she was frightened that the abuser might appear again. While going up to the third floor in the elevator, Detective Johnson asked Rebecca questions. "Has your mother ever said anything about the hospital staff? Has she ever expressed dissatisfaction or fear?" "No, quite the opposite," Rebecca replied. "She always said, 'The nurses are kind.' That's why today's behavior felt so unnatural." Elderly abuse victims often tend to protect their abusers, Detective Johnson explained. They fear retaliation or don't want to burden their families. When they reached the ward, they first went to the nurse's station. Mrs. Taylor, the charge nurse on duty, responded. "We're here to investigate suspected patient abuse." Detective Johnson showed her identification. "We'd like to ask about Dorothy Hamilton." Mrs. Taylor's complexion changed. "Abuse? That's impossible. Patient safety is our top priority at this hospital." "Then could you also call the hospital director?" Detective Martinez said. "We need a formal investigation." Hospital director Dr. Anderson was called. When he heard the situation, he also became serious. "If abuse is really taking place, that's unacceptable," Dr. Anderson said. "We'll cooperate with the investigation immediately." The police and Rebecca's group first headed to Dorothy's room. Dorothy was lying alone in bed and seemed a little surprised that her daughter and son-in-law had returned. When she saw the police officers, she was clearly upset. "Mom," Rebecca sat beside her mother's bed. "These people are from the police. They came to help you." "Police?" Dorothy was confused. "Why?" Detective Johnson pulled up a chair and sat at Dorothy's eye level. Her voice was gentle, with a motherly warmth. "Mrs. Hamilton, your daughter is worried about the injuries on your arms. Has someone hurt you?" At first, Dorothy shook her head. "No, I just fell. No one hurt me." However, Detective Johnson patiently continued questioning. From years of experience, she knew that victims don't immediately tell the truth. "Mrs. Hamilton, you're not alone. If someone is frightening you, we will protect you. You don't need to fear retaliation." Tears welled up in Dorothy's eyes. She looked at her daughter, then at the police officer again. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "Nighttime is scary," Dorothy said in a trembling voice. "But I didn't want to cause trouble." "Who is scary, Mom?" Rebecca held her mother's hand. "The night shift nurses, they're rough with us," Dorothy continued through tears. "When we don't take medicine, they grab our arms and say, 'Noisy old people should shut up.'" Rebecca was shocked. The hospital staff she had trusted had been abusing her mother. "Are there other patients being victimized?" Detective Martinez asked. Dorothy looked around at her roommates. Mrs. Wilson was also crying. "Everyone is scared," Mrs. Wilson said in a trembling voice. "But no one could say anything because we didn't want to worry our families." Detective Johnson immediately began taking action. First, they decided to check the hospital's security camera footage. Together with security personnel, they checked the nighttime footage from the past week. An hour later, shocking footage was discovered. 3 night shift nurses were clearly shown performing violent acts against patients. Scenes of grabbing patients' arms hard and forcing them to take medicine when they refused. Scenes of hitting patients who pressed the nurse call button. It was unbelievable. "This is clear evidence," Detective Johnson told the hospital director. "We need to immediately identify these 3 nurses and secure them." Hospital director Dr. Anderson turned pale. "I can't believe it. That such things were happening in my hospital." The 3 night shift nurses were Sarah White, Jessica Brown, and Emily Davis. They were all in their 20s to early 30s and had been working at this hospital for 1 to 3 years. Police cross-referenced their work shifts with the timing of abuse and confirmed a clear correlation. The next day, the 3 nurses were arrested at work. The ringleader, Sarah White, showed no remorse even when arrested. "I was just stressed out," she made excuses. "Those old people were always complaining, making work difficult." However, her excuses didn't work. The security camera footage was clear, and systematic abuse was undeniable. Complaints of victimization came from other patients as well. As a result, it was discovered that 12 elderly patients had been abused. All had remained silent because they didn't want to burden their families. Rebecca hugged her mother while feeling deep regret. Despite visiting every day, she hadn't noticed her mother's suffering. However, Detective Johnson comforted her. "You're a good daughter. You and your husband's sharp observation saved your mother." Many victims were rescued. The hospital took the seriousness of the incident to heart and immediately announced re-education of all staff and strengthening of monitoring systems. They also promised apologies and compensation to the victimized patients and their families. A week after the incident, Dorothy was transferred to the safer and more trustworthy Mountain View General Hospital. The staff at the new hospital welcomed her warmly and considered healing Dorothy's emotional wounds as part of her treatment. "The nurses here are really kind," Dorothy told her daughter. "I don't have to be scared anymore." Rebecca was truly happy that her mother's smile had returned. Freed from those fear-filled days, Dorothy was once again approaching rehabilitation with a positive attitude. The doctors were also amazed at her mother's resilience, and she was expected to be discharged earlier than planned. "Mom, why didn't you tell us?" Rebecca asked her mother one day. Dorothy answered while holding her daughter's hand. "I didn't want to worry you. And I thought no one might believe me. We're family, so you don't need to hold back," Rebecca said with tears in her eyes. "From now on, tell us everything. We're always on your side, Mom." Michael also visited every day to cheer up his mother-in-law. "Aunt, we're family. If you have any problems, please tell us right away." Meanwhile, harsh punishments were imposed on the 3 arrested nurses. The ringleader, Sarah White, received a 3-year prison sentence at trial. She made excuses in court about work stress, but the judge sternly condemned her, saying, "Abusing patients in vulnerable positions is never acceptable." The other 2 received prison sentences of 1.5 to 2 years, and all 3 had their nursing licenses permanently revoked. Their lives were completely ruined. Sarah was despised by other inmates as a bully of the weak and lived an isolated life in prison. Even after release, employment in medical or care fields became impossible, and they came to realize the weight of their past actions. Ironically, when they themselves became elderly and needed care, they would have to live with the fear of receiving similar treatment. The incident was widely reported in local media, and the seriousness of elderly abuse was recognized again as a social problem. Central Valley General Hospital worked to strengthen monitoring systems and thorough staff education to restore trust, but it would take a long time to regain lost trust. 3 weeks after the transfer, Dorothy was able to walk on her own using a walker. When she first stood up in the rehabilitation room, Rebecca and Michael cried with joy. "Look, Rebecca," Dorothy said proudly. "I can walk again." "That's wonderful, Mom," Rebecca hugged her mother. "You really worked so hard." On the day her discharge was decided, Dorothy said to Rebecca, "That scary experience might have deepened our bonds, looking back now." "What do you mean?" "Family are people who can sense each other's suffering without words. Just like you and Michael saved me." Rebecca nodded deeply. Family isn't just about blood relations. They are people who care for each other and extend helping hands without hesitation when in trouble. "Don't think you're causing trouble," Rebecca told her mother. "Helping each other is what family does. We'll always be together." Dorothy was grateful for her daughter's kindness while harboring hope for a new life. Those days of fear were over, and the secure daily life supported by her loving family had returned. On discharge day, the 3 of them left the hospital hand in hand. In the beautifully shining sunset, they headed home while confirming their true family bonds. They had learned firsthand that it's during times of weakness that a family's true worth is tested.